It's Syracuse Sports. We're back. Are you back? Do you have all 10 fingers, all 10 toes after a explosive 4th of July weekend? Hope you do. Hope you had a great one. And Syracuse fans are still feeling the buzz. Calvin Russell III, 5-star wide receiver, Miami Northwestern, commits to Syracuse. Their first 5-star recruit since 2001. You had Johnny Morant, 2000, Cecil Howard, quarterback, 2001. And then not again until Calvin Russell on Saturday night, a 24-year gap between 5-star players. And at the rate Fran Brown is going, he'll probably get another one within 24 days. Heck, within 24 minutes at the rate he's going here. So very exciting news, to say the least. Russell seemed to be going to Michigan. There were other indications, LSU, Oregon, Florida State, where was he going to go? Syracuse swoops in. Fran Brown works his magic. He outwits, outplays, and outlasts Michigan. Syracuse's biggest win over Michigan since September 12th, 1998. Remember Dwight Freeney taking down Tom Brady, the win in the big house before what was then the largest crowd in the history of college football. So a big win for Syracuse, no doubt about it. And it shows that we are in the era of name, image, and likeness. We're in the era of the transfer portal. Things are changing on a dime daily in college sports, but you still got to recruit. And from the beginning, what we have heard about Fran Brown is he is one of the best recruiters in the country. He literally won that title before he became a head coach here at Syracuse, and he need a coach that can recruit his tail off. And that is what Fran Brown does. We've seen a lot of recruiting wins. We've seen Syracuse move up the team rankings, some big splashes that have been made, but there is nothing like a 5-star commitment to get a fan base fired up. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some modern equivalency to this. Calvin Russell shares representation with his head coach, Fran Brown. That was certainly a factor in getting him to commit to Syracuse. Calvin Russell has his own line of apparel. He's got a Gump moniker. No, it's not Forrest Gump, although he runs as fast as Forrest Gump, it seems. It is great under major pressure, I believe is what Gump stands for. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but he's got his own line of apparel. He's got representation. So yes, there are some modern twists to a commitment, but through it all, the old mantra of college football is you got to recruit. You got to have a coach that can come in and close the deal. And with Russell, it seemed to come right down to the last minute. Michigan stunned. A lot of people in the recruiting world taking notice. So when Fran Brown is in your town and he's big game hunting, you better look out. And at the end of the day, through it all, you need a coach that can recruit in college football. And it is very much apparent that Syracuse has a coach that can recruit in the world of college football. So today we're going to bring on Marcus Benjamin of Rivals. He covers South Florida and was just as surprised as many that Russell committed to Syracuse, but had an opportunity to go to Calvin Russell's celebration on Saturday. What a party this was, by the way. It was a commitment party, but also his 18th birthday. And as you're going to hear Marcus say, it was done in true big-time Miami style. But why did Syracuse win out? What is Fran Brown's reputation now and Syracuse's reputation in South Florida amongst the players and the coaches? Could we be seeing more big-time commitments from Syracuse? Is there a potential flip out there amongst a big-time prospect that was in attendance at Calvin Russell's party on Saturday? And a whole lot more coming up with Marcus Benjamin of Rivals. Let me talk about a couple things, though, before we get to Marcus. First of all, we would love for you to become a Syracuse Sports Insider, which gives you direct text message access to me anytime. Your thoughts, your questions, your opinions on Syracuse football. We were all over it on Saturday with Russell's commitment. Julius Miles, a tight end that ended up going to Louisville, but recruiting never stops. There was news just earlier this week with King Joseph Edwards, a big-time recruit from Syracuse early in Fran Brown's days, who is now entering the transfer portal. Things are always happening in the world of college football and college sports, and we will keep you up to date on the Syracuse Sports Insider text line. Syracuse Sports Insiders get their voice heard exclusively on this podcast as well. We would love for you to join today. The information is right there on your screen. If you're watching on YouTube, join subtext.com/Syracuse Sports. It's just $3.99 a month to be a Syracuse Sports Insider, but you can try it free for 2 weeks and see what it's all about. The other thing we wanted to mention, of course, before we get to Marcus, is that we love to feature your original music here on Syracuse Sports. All the information is in the show notes on how you can get in touch and have your original music featured here on the show. Today, We're going to hear from James and the Kyusonics. This is a song called Unreal. So what we'll do is we'll play a little bit of the song now, and then we'll play it in its entirety at the end of the podcast. And we can do that for you or your band as well. So get in touch if you want your original music heard here on Syracuse Sports. It was Unreal that Calvin Russell committed to Syracuse in the eyes of some. We'll hear Unreal now, and then Marcus Benjamin from Rivals will join us to talk about it all.
Everything is fine. Minor inconsistency, it happens all the time. But she's wrong. I saw it all go down the other day. I had a real funny feeling that what she said was happening ain't real.
Well, Marcus, the 4th of July weekend is one for parties. It's one for fireworks. Syracuse fans certainly partying all weekend. But I got to start with this. It looked like a hell of a party you were at for Calvin Russell's announcement. Where did that rank in terms of the commitment parties and celebrations you've been at?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the most extravagant announcement parties that I'd ever been to. It was so Miami, if I could explain it in just a few words, like that announcement party was Miami to the fullest. So, yeah, it felt like the entire city or his entire community came out for this party. It was an open venue out in Wynwood, which is kind of the art district down in Miami. Yeah, it just kept getting more crowded and more crowded. He was actually scheduled to make his announcement at 9 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
But, the crowd just kept gathering at the venue, and he didn't end up getting to the venue until around 9:55 and then made his announcement around 10 p.m. So I would say it's probably the latest in an actual day that I've actually seen an announcement take place. But it was definitely a nice event. And happy for him and his family, of course.
Yeah, there was a little drama there because there were some initial reports that got out there on social media. Calvin got on X and said, I haven't committed to anybody. And everybody's trying to figure out what was going on. And then eventually it all came through and Syracuse won out there. So what a party, what a celebration, and what a pick for Calvin Russell. How did Syracuse end up winning his commitment?
Yeah, this was probably one of the more interesting recruitments to follow. Calvin Russell has been a top player since he was a freshman. He's just an outstanding athlete down here in South Florida. Even before his high school days, he's been making waves down here in the area. And he is a player that has always been high on Syracuse throughout his recruitment, and especially since Fran Brown, kind of came on board with the Orange. And it's a team that's been consistent, but it was a little odd that they didn't get an official visit from him.
Right.
Because usually, with recruiting, likely if you're taking an official visit then with a school, then likely that school is one of your top choices. So most of us kind of assumed that Syracuse was probably not in it because he did not take an official visit to Syracuse, took official visits to Florida State, Michigan, Miami, and others. But it was kind of confusing to me in the last week, just all the Syracuse buzz that started to kind of build up here. I spoke to him personally at OT7, which is the national 7-on-7 tournament down here in South Florida. Not last weekend, of course, but the weekend prior. And he openly told me that Syracuse fell off in his recruitment. That was his words. So he mentioned teams like LSU. He mentioned Miami. He mentioned, Florida State and Michigan. But it wasn't until days later until that Syracuse kind of jumped in the mix and he decided on his final four finalists of Oregon, Syracuse, Florida State, and Michigan. But what ultimately won out when I spoke to him after he made his announcement was his relationship with Fran Brown. Fran Brown really connected with him. He really looks at him like almost a father figure. And he really kind of really trusts Brown, and the option to play basketball has always been a significant factor for Russell. And I think that's why some of these other schools may have fallen off with his recruitment, because maybe they weren't as open of him playing both sports. But the top schools that were kind of offering both sports were Michigan, Florida State, and Syracuse. So I think ultimately the relationship with Fran Brown, his option to play basketball, is what won out for the Orange.
That's fascinating to see the potential of a two-sport athlete here at Syracuse. There's been a few here. Donovan McNabb notably played both football and basketball at Syracuse. But to hear you say, like, this came down to the last minute, and what we've certainly learned about Fran in these last couple of years, Marcus, is he is aggressive. He is going to stay on you, and he can flip some guys. But time and again, we've heard about Fran's charisma and his personality and the way he connects with these players. Every recruit, it seems like I've talked to in transfer, it comes down to, like, man, he's real. Like, he cuts through. He tells you exactly what he wants to hear. So I wanted to get a little bit of a follow-up on that, Marcus, and your impression on Fran and how he came in and outwit and outplayed all those big names and schools that were on Calvin Russell's radar.
Yeah, I think a lot of these players, especially players from areas that are kind of tough, they want to connect with someone that has maybe gone through a similar experience, or they feel that can connect with them on a personal level. And I think that's what Fran Brown does with these kids. He really connects with these kids on a personal level, and he instills trust in them, and he builds confidence in them. And I think that's what Calvin Russell felt with Coach Brown. I think throughout these next couple of years, who knows with the transfer portal what happens, because in this day, certainly for the next year or so, I think he's going to instill confidence in Russell to really be his best self, not only on the field but off the field as well. That is also really important to Russell. And like we talked about earlier, that he's the top player. First of all, he's obviously the top player of his class, but he's one of the top players ever for Syracuse in many, many, many years.
That's right.
So that tells me that he is going to compete for playing time as soon as he steps on campus in upstate New York. So I think that also played a factor. I think the opportunity to really make an immediate impact, and just that personal touch that Coach Brown provides is what ultimately won Russell over.
Now, we should put out the fine print here, Marcus. Of course, this was a verbal commitment, and nothing is officially official till he signs on signing day. But he did tell you on Saturday in his conversation that he's done with his recruitment and he's in on Syracuse, right? So, it doesn't get locked in until we see that piece of paper come in. But did you get the sense that he's done, and that Michigan and Oregon and Florida State and anybody else could try all they want, but it's going to be Syracuse all the way?
I do get that sense, because when I did talk to him the previous weekend, he was ready to get this process over with. Like I said, he's been recruited very highly since he was a freshman. And he described as, ever since, my recruitment has been blowing up, it's been hell. So it's definitely a process that he is happy is over. When I spoke to him, previous times, or even earlier this year, he mentioned that he wanted to kind of drag this out all the way until signing day. It wasn't until, this last month that he really decided to commit on his birthday, which was, Saturday. So, I get the sense that he's done with the process. He told me that he wanted to be done with the process, but like I said, at the prior weekend that I spoke to him, and he kind of reemphasized that point when he made his announcement on Saturday night that he was done. He told me he was done twice. He was very adamant about it. Of course, a lot of these kids are, after, an announcement, but I certainly believe that he'll stick with Syracuse throughout the process and sign with the Orange.
Marcus, what's your scouting report on Calvin as a player? It's interesting. I've been watching some film of him, as a lot of SU fans have, and I saw a little Aronde Gatson in him, who just got drafted by the Los Angeles Chargers. He's a tight end, of course, but the similar frame and just he really popped as a guy that looks like a player in that sense. But what would you say your comparison is, and just what's your general scouting report of him as a player coming in?
Rodney Gaston is actually a very good comp just because, I'm familiar with Gaston. He's from South Florida as well, so I've kind of watched him through his high school career. But Russell, I think, miles ahead athletically than Gaston. I think Gaston kind of developed, through the years at Syracuse to become an NFL prospect as he has. But there's nothing that Russell probably can't do on the football field. He played quarterback for his high school at a very high level, and led them to win a lot of games for his high school. And he has that basketball background, so he's very good with his hands. He can high point the football. When the ball is in the air, catch the ball in traffic. I think he can get better at route running. I will say that. I think as a route runner, I think he can take it to a higher level. But athletically, if you throw him the football, he's going to find a way to come down with the football as long as it's in his general vicinity. He's not super fast, but he's fast enough where he can break away from defenders, and certainly he can also break tackles as well once he has the football in his hand. But I think he could be more of an Anquan Bolden type of player, where he's this big physical receiver who can catch the ball down the middle or across the field. I think he can be a solid possession type of receiver. And I think he is a player that you're going to want to throw the fade to in the corner, for touchdowns. So I think he's a player that has a lot of upside. Even with him being a 5-star player as he is, I think he has a lot of potential to be even better, just because I think he can fine tune his route running to take it to the next level.
Yeah, it feels like he's a walk on the field and play kind of guy. And where I think Fran maybe had a little advantage there is a player you're certainly familiar with, Demetrius Samuel Jr. He comes into spring ball, and within 2 weeks, Fran's saying not only is he playing, he's going both ways. So there's some juice and there's some excitement, but there's an establishment that, look, you got to compete for the job, but you're going to put freshmen on the field if you're good enough. Fran has been very direct about that. And I'm intrigued, Marcus, you cover this every day, so you're just as intrigued by this as I'm sure I am. But so Calvin commits, and here's something I've never said before. He's represented by the same agency as his head coach, and he's got his own line of apparel. He's got a website. He's got the Gump moniker, which I believe is greatest under major pressure. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I just love the old school feel of you still got to recruit and you still got to get 5 stars and major players to shake things up. Yet the modern amenities of what you have to have in college sports in 2025 are all there too. It's fascinating how this all mixes together with him.
Yeah, I think that's the world of college football these days. I think if you're a high-profile player like Calvin Russell, then you want to take advantage of your name, image, and likeness. You definitely want to make sure you're kind of promoting yourself to the best ability, and he's definitely doing that. Nickname, Gump. He also has the nickname of CJ as well. I think he definitely wants to build up his brand to the utmost ability, and you can't really kind of fault him at all for that. I think a lot of these kids should take advantage of their name, image, and likeness, and I think it is kind of convenient that the agent is shared with his head coach. I think that's definitely a factor and why he committed to Syracuse. I think he definitely has the right people around him. It might be kind of tough for a player like him to not be distracted by a lot of the outside noise that comes with being a 5-star recruit. But I think he's got the right people around him, and I think he's doing the right things to make him successful both on the field and off the field.
Now, Marcus, you touched on this earlier. The basketball aspect of this is pretty intriguing.
It is.
He wants to play both ways. Syracuse was very open to that. It felt like it's tricky because obviously coaches can't say anything on the record in recruiting and everything. But from what I've heard, the basketball staff up here is very into this. Calvin can ball. He's a good player, of course. He's got the lineage. His mom is a Hall of Fame player at Miami. So, boy, I am intrigued by this. It's been a while since we've seen a true blue two-way player come into Syracuse that wants to play football and basketball. It just feels like you don't see that anymore in the modern age of college sports. So, tell me about Calvin Russell, the basketball player, and how that's going to factor into all this.
Yeah, as a basketball player, I think he's still very raw. I think it's going to take a while for him to really kind of develop on an ACC level, which, who most would consider maybe the best conference in the country over the past few years. Maybe the SEC kind of competes the past couple of years. But I think it's going to take a while for him to really develop to a top level basketball player. He has all the attributes, he has all the athletic ability to really be successful on the hardwood. But I think like how I mentioned with his football, abilities, I feel like he has another level to really kind of develop to. And I hate to say this, but I feel like playing the two sports makes him a little bit just not as good in one sport than the other, if that makes sense.
Takes away from the other kind of thing. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I feel like if he fully concentrated on basketball or he fully concentrated on football, I think he would be an even better player. But, you can't argue with him being 5-star, wide receiver and, a top tier basketball player as well. I think he is very raw when it comes to basketball, like when he is usually the most athletic player on the basketball court in high school. So you kind of see that and he kind of takes over in that way. So it would be curious to really see him lock down on defense, and really, face a player of his athletic ability, how he's going to handle that. I'm not sure how well he's going to adapt to that, just considering how, basketball down here in South Florida is good, but it's not great. It's not like New York or maybe other places. So I think that there's a few top prospects down here, maybe a handful, maybe about 6 or 7 that will probably really play high-level college basketball. But I think Russell, with him not playing against high-level competition consistently, I think it's going to take a while for him to develop as a basketball player.
Good to know on that front. Marcus, what was the the most interesting reaction either you got on your phone to Russell's commitment to Syracuse, or maybe one that you saw out there? Because certainly there's a lot of people with their eyes wide open after he picked Syracuse.
Well, I feel like, down here in South Florida, there was a lot of hate, I guess you could say, for not even making the top 4 for the Miami Hurricanes. The Miami Hurricanes not making the top 4. So,
and he's a legacy. So yeah, that adds a little salt to the wound. Yeah.
Right. For him being a legacy and at a powerhouse program at Miami Northwestern, traditionally Miami gets, a couple of players from that school. Cameron Kinchins is probably the most popular one as of late, who was drafted, not in the last draft, but the previous draft. It really put a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths down here in South Florida. And I think it was probably the deal breaker of playing both sports that really kind of maybe stopped him from kind of staying home. He had always talked very highly of the Miami Hurricanes, and the Miami Hurricanes basketball program obviously went through transition with losing Coach Larinaga and now going to Coach Jay Lucas. So I'm not quite sure if Lucas was or had Russell on his radar as other coaches. So I think that's what the reactions were pretty salty, I guess you could say, from the fan base down here, because we love to, I guess, keep our guys home. The fan base does. So, a guy like this, who, like I said, has been a player that fans have been watching since his freshman year and even during his youth football days, to see him not put Miami in his Final Four, I think was probably the most shocking and the most negative and vitriol reactions that I saw on social media.
Yeah, you can see the best and worst on these things when something like this goes down. Michigan fans fighting with Syracuse fans and the whole thing. But that's just the passionate world of recruiting, as you see every day, Marcus.
Yeah.
A couple more for you here before we let you go. So, man, Syracuse goes down into, as you know, one of the more fertile recruiting grounds in the country and lands one of the top players there, as you were just noting there. Everybody in Miami saying, wow, what's going on here? So I'm kind of wondering what the sense will be now that Syracuse is around, right? I mean, every school is in South Florida looking for prospects, but when you land a player like Calvin Russell, now all of a sudden Fran Brown's name stands out. Syracuse's name stands out. Tommy Caparelli, who's on the staff at Syracuse as the GM, has a lot of connections in Florida, has opened up a lot of doors to Florida. So how do you think Syracuse is going to be perceived now, and Fran Brown is going to be perceived now in the Miami area with the coaches? And maybe you already have heard about this a little bit, that now that not only they were in on Russell, but have landed him, does Syracuse have a little opportunity here to keep the momentum going, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely feel like they have a chance to really kind of go in South Florida and feel like they can get anyone. I mean, if you go down in South Florida and you pluck a 5-star guy who, like I said, has been coveted for many years, then I don't think a lot of other prospects are really off the table for the Cuse right now, as long as they continue to be successful. They had a pretty decent season last season, and I think the fact that they beat Miami in the season finale probably played a factor as well. And I think the connection that Coach Fran Brown makes with these kids, I think it's always going to resonate. As long as they feel like, hey, I can leave South Florida and go to cold upstate New York, then I think the Orange will definitely have a chance at a lot of different players, because to get Calvin Russell was not easy at all. It took a lot. I'm sure it took a lot of effort on not only Fran Brown's part, but the entire staff and the basketball staff to really land a commitment like Calvin Russell. So it told me that, okay, well, this could start some momentum for the Orange, because obviously, this is the top player that they've had in a while. They've got a couple of players that they've recruited from Florida in the past, as you mentioned, Aranda Gadsden. So they have that to hang their hat on as well, that they can not only recruit players from South Florida, but also develop them into NFL players. So if that continues with Russell, I don't see a player that's clearly off the board for the Orange going forward.
Marcus, you touched on it. I mean, look, we've got NIL money and other factors these days that can help recruit players, but one of the greatest recruiting things you can do is convince a kid from Miami to go through a central New York winter. If you've never been through it, it is a hell of an experience. And if you could talk somebody into wanting to be a part of that, then I give you all kudos in the world for being able to do that. One more thing for you here, Marcus. I've had a lot of SU fans that certainly noticed a presence at Calvin Russell's announcement party. That was Tedarius Hughes. It's a 4-star cornerback who was on Syracuse's radar, ends up committing to Florida State. Now, look, these guys are all friends. They know each other. Darius Johnson, Syracuse freshman, was there. And, these guys are tight-knit, especially in South Florida. So it could just be a friend at a party. But we know how these things go these days. People look like, oh, he was there. Does that mean he's going to flip? What do you think the chances of that are? Is he pretty locked into Florida State, or is it a player Syracuse should keep working on until signing day?
I definitely think it's a player that Syracuse should keep working on until signing day. But from what I've gathered lately about Tedarius Hughes, he seems pretty locked in with Florida State. And I think there's a real opportunity for him to get early playing time at Florida State. Florida State has, recruited a lot of players from South Florida. Conrad Hussey is a player, a safety, I think has a very similar kind of playing style and build, who's from down here in South Florida, who I think Tedarius Hughes could be the next version of. And then lately, Jason Lopez, who's a wide receiver from down here in South Florida, made his commitment to the Seminoles, but wasn't shutting down his recruitment. He made it clear that he wasn't shutting down his recruitment, and I put a story out on that. And after that, it seemed like Tedarius Hughes made a point to make it seem that he's locked in with the Seminoles. He put out a tweet saying, he's been committed for over a year now. So I think that was he really wanted to make the point that he's been locked in with the Seminoles and will continue to be locked in, which is impressive for a team that only won 2 games last year.
Exactly.
So just the fact that Florida State still right now, I believe they have a top 15 class, and to keep a guy like Tedarius Hughes, to get a guy like Jason Lopez to commit, to be in the mix for Calvin Russell. Florida State finished 3rd on the list for Calvin Russell. So it's impressive what they're doing. I do think Syracuse has a shot because, like I said, even with Russell last weekend or the weekend prior, he said that they fell off and then they jumped back in, and then he commits to Syracuse. So I certainly wouldn't count out the orange for Tedarius Hughes, especially since he's visited and he's teammates with Calvin Russell. I do want to point out that they are high school teammates right now. So Russell will be in his ear during the season, who I think their team is probably going to be one of the best in the country. Certainly, I think the best in South Florida. So I think Russell will have an influence on where Hughes goes, but I think he stays with Florida State.
The intrigue of recruiting. I see why you do this, Marcus. Every day, it's drama and intrigue and something different and fascinating to say the least. But hey, with Calvin Russell's commitment, Syracuse may be opening some more doors down there in South Florida. So I'm sure we'll be talking again down the road, but really appreciate your time and your insight on not only on working on the story, but coming on the pod with us today, my friend. We'll definitely do this again soon.
Thanks for having me, Brent, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks to Marcus Benjamin from Rivals joining us here on the pod, giving us the scoop on Calvin Russell. Intriguing that he's also thinking about basketball. And I don't think this is the last time we're going to be having a conversation with Marcus about Syracuse landing a South Florida big-time prospect. So check out Marcus, his work on Rivals and on social media. He covers the South Florida football scene as well as anybody. And who knows, Syracuse could be much more active in that department going forward here. It could be very active on this podcast. And I don't want to spoil anything here. We've got a lot of things in the mix, in the works, and are scheduled to happen. So make sure you are subscribed to Syracuse Sports, wherever you prefer your pod. Spotify, Apple, we're on YouTube. Just follow us, Syracuse Sports. And when a new podcast pops up, there it will be for you. Thanks to everybody that watched our live pod on Saturday. Javon Edmonds and I hopped on right after the Calvin Russell commitment late into the night on Saturday. We got a big audience for that. You guys were ready to go, amped up and fired up. And we appreciate you checking out that pod. But if you missed it, it's on our feed. So you can go back and listen and watch anytime you want on demand. And we're going to be pretty busy here. Even though it's the middle of July, it's summertime, people are taking vacations. I'm certainly going to be taking some time off soon before training camp gets underway and we get back to it, but we're going to keep it busy here on the pod until then. So make sure you're subscribed and follow so you don't miss a thing. Thanks to Marcus for joining us. Thanks to you. Thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders, as always, for their great insight, their questions, their comments, and the opportunity for you to have direct text message access to me anytime we send you the latest Syracuse sports news. If I have breaking news, you get it first as a Syracuse Sports Insider. Sign up today. We'd love for you to join our growing community of the passionate Syracuse sports fans out there. Okay, let's let our friends James and the Kyusonics take us out here. We heard a little bit of this song earlier in the pod, and now we're going to hear it in its entirety, and we could do the same for you. Get in touch. All the info is in the show notes if you want your original music featured here on Syracuse Sports. Thanks for checking it out, guys. We will talk to you next time here.
inconsistency, it happens all the time, but she's wrong. I saw it all